Ну что, добрый день, дорогие друзья.
Good afternoon, dear friends, and we are about to start our session. It's the session on Russia and the world. We are at this hospitable office at the Ministry of Industry. It's the sunlit view from the window and an equally sunlit and bright prospects for the Russia's economy. It is no coincidence that we have here the head of an important federal government agency, federal ministry, who made a major contribution into development of our economy by, for instance, introducing a variety of bills to State Duma and doing many other things. We also have here Kirill, Lipa, head of Transmashholding, which is a successful actor on the foreign markets, and I represent the Committee on Industry and Trade, which is quite involved in developing for the industrial development. And we monitor the progress on national programs, which vary greatly from aviation and space to shipbuilding and nuclear energy. Mr. Manturov, but I would like to put a broad question, if I may. You had the Ministry of Industry, one of the most important industries in our country, but you also are in charge of a major national project. It's the International Cooperation and Export Project, and we are making good progress in this. And so I would want to ask your opinion about how things are going, and can we use what I would term a cookie-cutter solution on this track? Can we copy-paste the experience of other countries that spearhead the effort currently, or do we need to tackle this challenge in a different way? Do we need to blaze our own trail? Given the context of sanctions that were imposed against us, how do we make our success ever more tangible and outstanding? Well, thank you, Vladimir. Thank you, Kirill. I think that the operative word that you've used is the import substitution. And some of our foreign counterparts do not exactly like, are not exactly enthusiastic when they hear the subject. That being said, I should point out that it is intrinsically linked with the national project that you've mentioned, the export project, and I have been charged specifically to perform in this area. We, as I believe, have covered quite a lot of ground over the last 5 years, and it was not in vain. I think we would have never accomplished the establishment of such a vast array of import substituted Russian manufactured goods. If not for the domestically produced goods, if not for creating this successful product on the domestic market, we have the reference point to start with, and as a follow-up, we can go abroad and try to compete at the foreign markets. If we look at the numbers of 2021 and look at the non-commodities, non-energy exports. And look, for instance, at the figures for agriculture, the exports have grown by 15%, and for industry it went up by 30%. And mind you, I want to underscore this specifically, that's the net figure, something that has been adjusted to inflation and currency exchange rate changes. Which brings me to say that the principles that underpin the effort, that underpin the national project itself, have borne fruit. And some of my colleagues have asked me, and some of journalists asked me, what is the percentage share of non-commodities and non-energy exports in the overall volume of Russia's export, and what is the share of the state support measures? Well, this is a multifaceted and a complicated project that cannot be easily broken down onto various components. So we would say that it's factoring in subsidizing credits. It supports the export-oriented production. It offsets the logistics costs, for instance. And starting from 2021, starting in this year, we are also offsetting costs for homologation and certification. We are also introducing a number of other support measures that are implied in the project. But none of them are related to a direct monetary support. It can be related to something different. For instance, it's the articulation of the work of intergovernment joint commissions. After all, we have over 100 of such commissions with our foreign partners. And most of these commissions have something common on their agendas. One of the aspects they look into is the trade between our countries, specifically trade in non-commodity and non-energy export and goods. So this is the bilateral agenda shared by all the government members. And again, it also includes trade shows that are regulated, that are organized quite regularly. I'd say that approximately 20% of all the exports were enabled by state intervention in one way or another, since it includes a variety of forms of support. That being said, I should also add that this is the path that has been charted by the government, and this is the path of support for non-commodity and non-energy exports. And I do believe that it will since we're reaching the mass-produced scale stage for the projects that we have started to implement in 2018, ever since the national projects have been put online. These were the projects that we started to support on a state level, and I think that over these 3 years we have fully adopted these measures of support that the real sector of the economy so desperately needs. So that would be no exaggeration to say that the benchmarks and the indices from the national projects will be accomplished in time. Question. There's no doubt in my mind that in 2021 we have accomplished quite a lot. And for 2022 we set the eyesights even higher. We need to accomplish the projects that are in the pipeline, and we have to withstand the challenges that we face. As you probably remember full well, by the end of 2021, the EU and many other associations that have imposed sanctions against Russia that run counter to international law and to the rules of the WTO started reproaching us with violating certain rules, for instance, by the Federal Law 23 and 244. And I believe we have to be very careful and very prudent as we look into the vendor reliability. This should not be a goal in and of itself. But look at the example of MC-21 aircraft, the Blackwing. We can derive a certain conclusion from this instance. If there is a deadline creep because of the unreliable vendors, we have to do something about it. We should point this out, true, but we should perhaps put in practice some tougher measures. I think that we have laid a foundation, a really robust one, acting in conjunction as the executive branch and the legislative branch. We have introduced this, what we call the three is a crowd rule for pharmaceuticals and heavy metallurgy and machine building industries. And this is a major thing. We managed to introduce many things in terms of localization for IT and many other industries. And yet, having said this, why I want to point this one thing. The Ministry of Industry is quite successful in identifying the targeted measures of support. You have moved from SPEAK 1.0 to SPEAK 2.0. And whichever we create a high-quality product, we succeed. You said that once we get this kind of products, we succeed. And I would probably add as a follow-up something different, that as we have the national sovereignty level that we enjoy, we can accomplish these efforts. And we managed to localize the manufacturing for an over of 700 companies. I think it's upwards of 700. You've cited some agricultural equipment manufacturer. John Deere, was it? Oh no, it was Class. Yes, Class, you're quite right. So Class has not just localized its production. So it did transfer its production capacities to localize the production, but it also re-exports some of its manufactured goods. So what's the fine-tuning mechanism that we can introduce so as to keep the pace of economic growth up and to accomplish more feats of labor?
Thank you for this question. Now, on European countries and non-European countries, late last year, I think we all read the same report, statement by our EU counterparts. They put up that statement on the WTO website, and it's read: Russia discriminates against European products as part of its procurement campaigns by state-run companies. I'm a bit surprised. They might have ignored some of the previous documents, or maybe this WTO accession process was too long that they lost the train of thought, you know. We started the talks 15 years ago, and it all ended in 2012. Initially, and later on, we've never assumed any commitments, any extra commitments, and we've never joined or acceded to the para on public procurement. It was quite difficult for us to adapt to the requirements of that respectable international organizations. I'm referring to the way our industry operates. But in terms of private firms, well, there are no restrictions whatsoever vis-à-vis our international vendors, those who are part of partnerships or who bid to supply their products, no restrictions. But for public procurement, again, we have a sovereign right over what we do there in this realm. We're fully entitled to do this, otherwise why have we embarked on import substitution? The reason was to ensure, as I said, the right products, the equivalent products in the Russian market, and to use public procurement as a guaranteed distribution channel for those products. Here's one example. Last year, we supplied 5.5 trillion worth of products. That's a staggering amount, absolutely. And each year, that amount is going up. Again, you also asked me about 2022 plans in terms of extra policies. Actually, it's all there. It's all been adopted. We've been moving steadily along this path. We needed to acquire the right qualifications. We've acquired the right technology, and you mentioned that. About 700 technologies have been introduced, and we're not going to rest on our laurels. Every month, every year, we're seeing the introduction of new solutions, which our companies are interested in, and the government is also interested in embracing those new solutions. That's why we've extended that list. But it doesn't in any way impose any restrictions. In 2021, we've capitalized on those legal provisions that the Parliament has helped to roll out upon the instruction of the President. You've introduced quotas for public procurement, and finally we have it. We have those hard, cold facts, you know, we have the figures. Question. You talked about preferences for Russian suppliers, and it's fine, that's a norm. And in the 1930s, a law was passed in the US that said, buy American, hire American. And can we imagine a American policymaker calling for the purchase of any Russian or European product? No. So these yelling, and I can't call it any other way, I guess it's just jealous of our success. There was a Soviet movie, and there was this boss and her PA, and the PA asked, do you like my new shoes? And the boss said no, and the PA said, okay, then I'll do the opposite and buy them. So it just means that our government is doing the right thing, and I'd like you to comment on the case study that Mr. Lipa will talk about. But before that, let me focus on EPC contracts. We are fully aware that we need to deliver high-quality products, and that's the only chance to get a springboard to internationalize. It needs to be high margin, it needs to be high-tech, high quality, but we also understand there are different levels of maturity. So if it's a good product, maybe you will be incorporated into some contract pool. The second level of maturity is when there's a big firm which has a broad suite of services. It's like turnkey projects. You mean abroad? Well, in general, it could be both here and abroad. We need to have those successful EPC firms that operate here in Russia, and then they can move on to other countries. But ideally, they need to be able to work both ways, although there could be some specificities internally. And that will help us to have a full range of suppliers from Russia. And the third level of maturity, when we have those great firms who can deliver EPC contracts, and we're also a major investor. We use our funding
который поставщик
with their own string of suppliers and contractors. Take Rosatom, Russia's atomic energy
компании чуть менее масштабные,
giant.
но, возможно, там
There
более
are
подвижные, более
less,
креативные,
there
решают
are less big firms,
тесной кооперации. Вот,
and
допустим,
they
если
can
я
work
ошибаюсь,
together
контракты египетские,
with
да,
other
где
firms, and they can be more
партнеры
agile.
были
I'm referring to this contract with Egypt, and you teamed up with partners from European country. Could you walk us through your experience, and Mr. Manturov would then comment on this case study on how can we capitalize on this experience and take it further. Mr. Lipa, over to you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak here today and to share the successful case study we've had with Mr. Manturov and with the Ministry of Industry and Trade, particularly on international cooperation and exports. The project with Egypt is a unique one, and it's truly unicorn. Why? First, the contractor is a plant which is notoriously known here in Russia, the TVZ plant, and some time ago, it was simply struggling because of a deficit of orders, but the Russian president, the Russian government, and the Ministry of Industry and Trade and Russian Railways helped to secure a 7-year contract for this plant. We said earlier that we need to become a national champion and to get the same equivalent products here in Russia, and that plant beat its competitors and secured a contract for 1,300 passenger coaches that's worth €1 billion. That's the biggest contract for Egypt, and our share in Egypt is more than 30%. But that was just the beginning. We needed to provide funding for that project, and the cooperation between Russia and Hungary was important here, and the Ministry of Industry and Trade has helped us too. And thanks to this partnership, TMH today is also a producer in Hungary, because we had to provide for 51% of components made in Europe. And that was a benefit for us. And we set up, we purchased a facility in Hungary, and it's up and running, and that Hungarian plant supplies passenger coaches to Egypt alongside with TVZ plant. And we've been followed by other Russian suppliers. So what we do is just 40%, and the rest we purchase from other vendors. And in order to get that 51%, we had to develop local producers, and so these are the traditional suppliers of TVZ. So they're also moving to Europe, and we've got a certificate that we are in line with European standards. It means we can take part in any further auctions, and they're supposed to finalize this year. I hope we will be declared the winners. Now, it's a follow-up on Egypt. On top of this supply contract, we are finalizing the talks on a maintenance contract, and that would imply a huge workshop there. We will set up a dedicated workshop in Egypt, and we will be doing repair and overhaul for the passenger coaches in Egypt. And I think this is an illustrative example. This is emblematic of the success of the Russian Federation, with huge support from the government and with the leadership. And the Russian Export Center has helped us to secure financing, and that helps us to enter the market where the Soviet Union historically has been very successful, very efficient, very popular, and they still enjoy a great reputation. I mean, referring to the equipment that was supplied back in the Soviet times. So I think we just need to replicate those success stories, and that will help us to move internationally. Mr. Manturov, how can we strike this delicate balance? We need cooperation, but our cooperation on MS-21 aircraft led to a shift in deadlines. The dates were brought forward. But Mr. Lipa's case study means that it can really do good. And sometimes we can turn competitors into partners. Now, based on your rich experience, how could you comment on Mr. Lipa's example? And could you please explain to our audience on where this balance is? Is it a static balance or is it fluid? Maybe it depends on the geopolitical sentiment. So how can we constantly move forward? How can we keep our competitive edge in the markets where we are, where we're not, so that we become part of those supply chains based on the products, the references that we can produce ourselves right now? Mr. Lipa just gave you a great example of TMH experience, international experience. And he mentioned the contract that they want to secure. That's a life cycle contract. You talked about EPC contracts earlier. It's like a turnkey contract. And Mr. Lipa referred to the life cycle contract, from assembly to supply to maintenance and recycling, scrappage. Right. Well, scrappage is the goal, the job for the next generations. An upgrade and maintenance, that's part of the full cycle contract. Now, if we move to EPC contracts, again, we go back to what you said earlier. That will help to expand cooperation that we de facto enjoy. So you cannot just take Russia out of this puzzle. We are part and parcel of those supply chains, global supply chains. We work with foreign firms and deliver on our commitments. Well, the same is happening with Rosatom. You mentioned it earlier. It works in several countries, and those countries set certain conditions. They want the local suppliers to be engaged in construction of nuclear power plants, and Egypt is no exception. And we do have an industrial zone there, and there will be some workshops and facilities that will produce and supply components as part of this NPP contract. As for EPC contracts, back in Soviet times, we got a wonderful experience back in the 1920s, and later on, foreign suppliers came to Russia, transferred some technology, and at a certain point in time, they realized they will just provide turnkey projects and will not transfer their technology. And that was in the late 1930s and later on. And the Soviet Union then embarked on a campaign to set up a network of research and industry-specific institutions. This is what you might refer to as EPC contracts. That's when we started learning how to do it, learning the ropes, so to speak, of how we set up industry-specific enterprises. Take chemicals or metals. Today, well, you know that back in the 1990s, this network of research institutions fell apart, and we had to start it to restore it from scratch back in the noughties, and that was a quick recovery process. We relied on foreign counterparts, foreign contractors. We had to rely on the experience of foreign EPC contractors. I can safely say today that we do have the right qualifications. We have been able to build capacity on major world-class companies in the chemicals industry, for example. Take Sibor, and they've been implementing their projects almost on their own. Novatech is another great example. So these firms have matured, and they can set up in new industries. That's the new service that they offer. They can build a turnkey project for a foreign
с учетом в том числе поставки
client.
там зарубежных компонентов, как,
And they could
например,
also source some of the foreign components like we do
египетский пример, это один из
in Egypt. As
позитивных
just
моментов.
one of
Но
the
на самом
success
деле
stories, we
есть
have
хорошие примеры на
many others.
периметрах Средней Азии.
Take Central Asia, for example, Uzbekistan. A Russian metal firm, an engineering firm, delivered a turnkey metal plant in Tashkent.
В том числе с международной
And they've
кооперацией.
used some international partners. We've invited Italian partners, Daniele. It's an Italian firm that helped them to supply some of the equipment.
То есть я хочу еще раз
So
сказать,
what I
что
want to say once again is that
набирается,
we are
формируется по EPC
building capacity on EPC contracts, and the same is true for the full cycle contracts.
And the same is true for full cycle contracts, since it's one of the linchpins of the foundation for industrial development. Question. Fully agree. Mr. Manturov, you mentioned in the 1930s at some point, and you might remember that there was a policy article published in the Soviet Pravda, the Truth newspaper, when the collectivization drive was quicker than expected. It was titled "Dizzy with Success." Well, let me be frank with you. You've attained quite a success during our current efforts, and perhaps we have too might have gone dizzy with our successes. But perhaps if we go beyond the today's efforts, or perhaps tomorrow's efforts, and engage in a kind of a over-the-horizon planning exercise, there might be something else that would drive growth further. Take aircraft industry, for instance. During the Air Max trade show, it was intended to produce 1.6 trillion rubles worth of aircraft. What would it require? It will take a whole new generation of workforce, new experts. The Ulyanovsk enterprise Aviastar alone is planning to hire over 3,500 people for production of Il-76. So one of the drivers of growth for creating centers of excellence and upskilling the workforce is the defense sector. The President has tasked us achieve some benchmarks by 2030, say 50% of localized production. But the thing is, it seems all right, but the low margins of cost makes it unattractive as an employer. And many graduates of Bauman University, the Stankin University, assess their own prospects, the salary prospects, if they go into the defense sector, and it's not competitive with the market and with the competition, and it also requires extra financing for the research and development centers, the centers of excellence. So we are very concerned with what we see right now, the fintech bleeding the labor market dry and poaching every IT specialist out there. So we think that some out-of-the-box thinking is required. What do we do about this? And going back to the MC-21 again. So what happened to the Blackwing? We had the workforce crunch. Wouldn't it happen to the CAD, the computer-aided design industry as well? Well, I do have a good premonition here. After all, our Prime Minister is a graduate, is alumnus of Stankin University, and he even had his thesis written on CAD systems. So he's very much in the know. He understands this topic properly, inside out. So if we look at the mid-term to long-term prospects, what are the bottlenecks that we might be facing, and what would you, as executive branch of government, would do? Answer. Well, that was a broad stroke picture. Question. Well, narrow it down. Well, first, I even thought of creating a YouTube channel where we would have these interviews on the regular manner. Answer. Well, we have quite a good lead-in, so you're a natural interviewer, I think. Well, you started with the word potential, and as I heard this, I started preparing myself to respond on the possible bottlenecks, but then you went on a tangent and broached the issue of reskilling and upskilling the workforce, and then you went back and kind of completed the cycle and went back to the means of manufacturing again. So let me try to tackle all of the issues that you've mentioned, albeit briefly. And I'll try to make it clear, I'll try to articulate the, so to speak, the prongs of our multi-pronged effort. Where do we apply our energy? And I'll start with the bottlenecks, if you don't mind. You've mentioned the Speak to Zero contract already. So what's the driving force behind it? What's the rationale? It's this. Put simply, it's a greater technological competence, as different from we had on the initial stage, and I do think that we have completed the first stage with a significant degree of success. We have attracted plenty of financing, over $1 trillion of rubles already within the current 45 investment contracts, and there's more in the pipeline. That being said, what are the bottlenecks? It's the critical technology. It's the critical technology where we lack the competence at the moment. What this includes is the import substitution plan 2.0, just like we had Speak 2.0. This plan was adopted last year. This is the second iteration of this program. Initially, when we dealt with import substitution, we were substituting the manufactured goods, so now we go deeper, and we are saying that we need to look in the areas of feedstock, the materials, the spare parts, so as to have the necessary competence, self-reliance and stability in the supply chain, so to avoid any supply chain bottlenecks or crunch. Well, you spoke about aircraft buildings, but let me pivot from this and shift your focus towards pharmaceuticals. 60% of active ingredients, the API, are bought from abroad to produce the finished dosage forms for medicines. That's what our domestic pharmaceutical manufacturers do. They buy 60% of the active ingredients. So if we are talking about say monoclonal medicines, be it generium or Biocad, this kind of pharmaceuticals, they are 100% produced at the facilities, at the production facilities of domestic companies. So that's a good thing. That's 100% localization. But if we talk about the chemical synthesis instead, then we will need to develop our low-bulk chemistry, low-bulk chemical industry. I'm hesitant to use the strong language and say that it is underdeveloped, but we certainly face a task of gaining greater self-reliance. And it applies to chemical industry, to machine tool building industry, to many other sectors beyond it. Pretty much all of them need the localization of feedstock and materials if we are to achieve the goals that President has set us by 2024. And I say that by 2024 we need to localize these industries by 70 to 75%. So the idea is to overcome this crunch, to do something about, to address these bottlenecks, do something about areas where we lack competences or proper localized production. Now, moving on to the second question. How do we incentivize people?
Это
So,
государственная поддержка в виде
there are plenty of ways to
компенсации
go about it. First is the state support. It can be the state support in terms of
49, там, по нему
funding the research and development efforts, or perhaps to subsidize the loans and credits on the top priority projects.
третий лишний,
Or
или
perhaps we
второй
can
лишний.
introduce some sort of a
Совершенно верно.
3 is a crowd or even 2 is a crowd rule to this area too. For instance, if we have two competitive domestic
Российских
producers and a foreign one introduces its bid on an invitation to bid, it will be cut off.
отсекать
Having such a tool would effectively enable us cutting off foreign competitors. Question, so we are not cutting off competition, we are cutting off foreign competition. Answer, exactly so. It's a way to boost the local competition.
убрать
So
ту
the
дискуссию,
idea for me
возникает
is
часто
to
у нас
curb
в массах,
the discussion that public in general often engages in. So, okay, the powers that be again made another decision. They want to discriminate the foreign producers to ban the foreign goods that we are so accustomed to.
поставщики прекратят
And,
свои
well, I
поставки.
counter this with a question, what do we do if they stop their supplies altogether? What kind of rhetoric and what kind of discussion will be engaged in this case?
Как,
They'd
собственно,
ask us, why haven't we had any alternatives to this? Why don't we have this backup suppliers? Why wouldn't the Black Wing, the MC-21 scenario, happen again? It is perfectly possible.
обеспечить свою национальную
This is the
безопасность.
national security issue, the national interests issue.
Вы абсолютно
So I do believe that we need some extra effort here. Moving on to the labor force, the workforce, I fully concur with you in the sense that this is a bottleneck and we have to do something about it. Now, the quoted number of 3,500 high qualified experts that Uliana wants to hire. That doesn't sound like a feasible task. But if we stretch it to the 3 to 4 years, that can be done. Well, we need to educate them. They need to be brought
совершенно верно. Поэтому
up to speed of the modern technology and the current production methods, which is something we're actively engaged in. So that's the dual degrees programs. It's the patronage, the alignment of the educational institutions and the industry-specific
запускаем
employers.
просвещение.
In 2024, together with Ministry of Education, we introduced the new specialty programs, so we try to boost this educational drive.
Без турникетов. То есть очень много вы проводите. Что
Совершенно верно. Дальше,
Question, so
если мы
the
говорим про
Krasnodar University, the Lipetsk University, they're doing this. Answer, yes, they are, among others. If we're talking about defense sector, then we have specific scholarships and stipends to attract talented youth and talented population to this area. And one other thing is the machine tool industry, machine tool production industry.
Станкина, он понимает,
Thank God that a prime minister is an alumnus of Stankin University, and he understands the minutiae of the process. He understands how crucial this production means are for any modern production capacity.
развитие
Well, this is a major
это
boost.
вот, честно хочу сказать,
Having him as a prime minister is a great thing, since he understands this sector so thoroughly. But machine tool building industry proper is still underperforming. And even if we go back to the Soviet times, you'll see the situation was no different. some exporting enterprises had this foreign exchange backup fund when they had some foreign exchange excesses, the surplus of foreign exchange from their foreign sales, and when they were able to manage this surplus to buy equipment abroad, this was the greatest degree of happiness, I guess. Question: oh, and they were buying from the Czechs, the Skoda tools. Answer: from them too, but from Japan, from Germany, and many others. Question: and they are localizing these productions now. Answer: yes, they do. So some of these companies are now doing it locally. So that's what we prompt them to do. Come to Russia, localize the production, produce it here and sell it here. The same applies for CAD systems. One good case in point is Logos from Rosatom, but we shouldn't stop there. Let me now yield the floor to Kirill, Lipa. Where things are at your company with the CAD systems, and is it even possible that your company and companies like yours will pioneer the domestic development of CAD systems? Do you think there is a good prospect on the market? Can something be done here? Answer: first, we agree that there is a great degree of dependence on the foreign vendors in this particular sector. And it's multifaceted. First off, we have such thing as a EBOM, the Engineering Bill of Materials, where all the information about any particular manufactured goods is stored. If it's any disruption to the EBOM happens, the whole production stops. Then the system must be integrated into the enterprise planning system. If this is not functioning, the production stops. And one other thing, something that we've already broached, it's all things life cycle related. It's the predictive analytics, it's the planning of the life cycle. If it's not working or if it's not there, the equipment would not be used. So the IT support right now is vital and the paramount factor of production. It's true that there is a variety, a plethora, in fact, of the IT solutions vendors, and it's a multi-pronged effort, and we need to invest to it. And given its scale, it's probably a national project scale task. We work with different IT providers. We try to engage the Russian ones or the Belarusian ones. And by the way, a lot of IT solutions are designed and built in Belarus. They still have this good school of thought and a good pool of talented specialists there. I will spare you the details about specific vendors that we work with, but there's plenty of good providers here. Still, more are needed. And I want to top it up with something else. There is a new promising area of development, what we call the 1D engineering. And in this regard, our country has a promising future. It's a blue ocean still. There's virtually no competition, and we can feel it. So if we concentrate and pull in the efforts of many manufacturers, be it defense sectors, car makers, companies from our sector, and we marshal our efforts this way, we'll be able to succeed. The 1D engineering is basically a mathematical model for any manufactured goods. It's not just about mechanicals. It can be something related to electrical equipment and circuitry and many other things. But I do believe it's a promising domain. The key thing is that we need the competence. We need the centers of excellence. We need to apply this academic knowledge to produce specific results. This would effectively bring us beyond the obligatory standards that differ from country to country. And once you have this relevant and timely statistics that is corroborated by mathematical data, you have an ability to save hugely on costs, save on testing time, and on testing costs. So, echoing back on the discussions we had with Prime Minister Mishustin when he was visiting our facility in Tver, I should say that our countries have all the necessary things to be the leader in this industry. Question. Actually, we had quite a substantial survey among the industry. Sergei Chemezov, head of Rostec, spearheaded the effort, and we had a major newsletter on all the members of the Union of Machine Building Industry. So people had the feedback sent to us on the ideas what should be done with the existing CAD systems, how they can be improved and enhanced. And I think it actually merits a creation of a workforce between the State Duma and, for instance, Ministry of Trade, which would look into it and offer some management decisions. Well, Mr. Manturov, you're in good shape. You're a sportsman. You've been a competitive sportsman, and you know how important a warm-up is. Before you do some serious weightlifting, you have to warm up your muscles. So I think we've warmed up our thinking muscle, and we can try some advanced tasks. Answer, well, and this wasn't advanced already. Question, well, let's try to tackle something even more complicated. You know, several years ago, I got really interested in the subject of exhaustion of intellectual rights. And I looked into the pool of the research papers prepared under the aegis of State Duma, and we've prepared, together with the Gutenev Foundation, an interesting research which produced this particular finding. It's not exactly a complete research paper, but I'm trying to wrap my mind around and understand what's your attitude to these things. There can be no clear-cut yes or no, a clear-cut answer to this question. You mentioned pharmaceuticals, and you said that to an extent this is an issue of national security. And I would draw an analogy to the critical infrastructure and the trusted equipment in this infrastructure. So the issue of exhaustion of intellectual rights, and I'll give a brief description to the audience what this is.
I'd just like to walk you through what it is. There are three regimes: the national, regional. We used to have the national regime. Now, since the EU has been set up, we are in the regional regime, and there's also the international regime. Now, if I live in a country with an international regime, then whenever I'm on a business trip or on vacation, and whenever I see, for example, brake pads for my car, I see that they are cheaper. I buy them, I bring them to a dealership and say, hey, I've bought them abroad and I'd like to save a few dollars. Now, if I live in a country with a regional national regime, they would say, sorry, dude, you have to first purchase it from a dealership or a distributor who is located on this territory, in this country or in this region. So the basic question that I could raise here is discrimination by quality and by price. Sometimes we see that pharmaceuticals in developed countries with a high per capita income cost cheaper than when they are sold here by our local suppliers. But maybe there's also something there that merits further attention. Well, you know, a couple of years ago, people wanted to buy pharmaceuticals in Korea, Japan, and elsewhere because they thought, and perhaps it was a reality, that those that were produced for our market don't really work that well. Are we certain that negligence or discrimination will not manifest in any other properties? Since the beginning of the year, again, since I'm a chair of the Committee for Industry and Trade, I also have the mandate to oversee the Russian consumer rights watchdog. And I've been seeing some complaints and feedback from the Russian consumers, and they say that they're being discriminated by quality. Take Swiss chocolate. It's one quality, one taste in Switzerland, and quite another one in Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan. I don't really believe it. I don't believe that detergents foam up in a different way in different countries. But as we're moving towards a tougher showdown, anything is possible. So what's your take? I understand every regime does have its pros and cons. A national or regional regime incentivizes for an investment, but we're under sanctions. I don't think it really makes sense to pursue that. So should we still keep this national or regional regime, or maybe we should look further ahead? I understand this is a decision that is not changed every year. So we need some kind of long-term solution, and I understand maybe this session will not yield the final answer, but it's all about fighting for the share of the market, about competition. So, should we raise this issue, or we are at a juncture when we should be guided by the principle first, do no harm, and there are other priorities? Well, that's quite a statement. It's not a question. I guess you have voiced your position. Well, no, I'm an interviewer. I'm just, fielding questions. So you want to ask me whether I endorse your approach. Well, is it the right time to raise this issue? Or there are other priorities on the radar, and we should not undermine the stability that we currently have. Well, I'll try to give you an answer. I can't say it's less hard-hitting than those that we discussed earlier, but it's more provocative. Well, I needed to spice it up. Yes, I agree. On rights exhaustion, it's been on the agenda for many years. Mr. Shuvalov used to address this question, and the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, the Russian Antitrust Service, addressed this issue too. There were several options, and I've made public statements on this issue, and I've not changed my view. International rights, intellectual property rights have to be protected, shall be protected. Well, there might be some national security issues when it merits an exception. We had one situation during the onstart when COVID-19 broke out, and I don't want to name the firm. I don't want to have anyone offended or jealous, but indeed, we rubbed the salt into anyone's wound, but that was an exception. We've
Я лично сам
I
целый
personally
месяц проводил переговоры
held those talks for a month
с
with
руководителями
the head
зарубежной компании
of
и
that
просил их
foreign pharmaceutical company, and I asked them to share their license with us. And the Russian firm was ready to pay the royalties
произведенного флакона.
for each of the vials.
Значит, один
So
флакон,
just one vial,
ладно, скажу, ремдесивир,
okay, it was remdesivir,
стоил $480 США. Один
480
флакон.
US dollars, just one vial, and you need 3 doses. That's the minimum,
От 3 до 7.
3 to 7
При том,
doses.
что зарегистрированная цена
And
в России
the price in Russia was 7,000 rubles. Well, you know, I don't really have any words to comment on this. Words fail me. So, what was I supposed to do? Did I have any other options?
Может быть,
Well, we were told that maybe in a year
вам таки дадим.
we're going to
Ну, во-первых, через год
sell
у
you
нас
the license.
может и свое появиться, что,
Well, in
собственно,
a
и
year we
произошло.
might have our own product, and that's what's happened. Generics pop up every month, and they are registered
Нашим Минздравом
by
по мере
the
появления
Russian Healthcare Ministry.
Мы же понимаем, что ковидных лекарств, как таковых ковидных,
COVID therapeutics
изначально они не
don't really
их
exist.
нету. То есть они адаптируются
We
из
need to take some other therapeutics
лекарственных средств,
and adapt them
которые
to
имеют свойства
COVID-19 treatment. There might be some property, some quality which helps to treat
у нас другого просто выхода не было.
COVID-19. We just were
Тиражировать,
pressed and we didn't have any other option, but I wouldn't replicate this experience.
делать это как практику.
I wouldn't turn it into a practice.
Я хотел бы защищать международные
I would
права
like
и
to see international intellectual property rights protected and the rights of international manufacturers protected here in the Russian territory. We are a civilized country, mind you, and we have
права
to
международных компаний.
respect the rights of international firms.
Что и наши права, наши компании будут также защищаться
And we
в их
want
странах.
to know that the rights of Russian firms will also be protected in those countries. And I've seen many other cases,
По мною упомянутому ремдесивиру
like
другие
take
страны,
remdesivir, for example.
которые называются
Other nations
развивающиеся,
which are labeled as developing, were emerging, were given the right to produce. And we are in the developed nations category. And I'm proud of that.
буду защищать
And I will
принципы
protect
развитой страны,
those
развитой
principles, the
экономики.
principles
Но
that
цивилизованно
are preached
нужно
by
всегда
civilized, developed nations. You always need to walk that fine line.
настолько жадными
You cannot be
владением,
too greedy.
имея в виду,
It's not always about money.
есть случаи там в
There are
жизни,
cases in
когда нужно
life
поскупиться,
when definitely you will have to
взвешенное решение.
take a
Еще
balanced decision,
в нормальной жизни
but under normal circumstances, in a business as usual situation,
при штатных ситуациях
when everything is fine,
защищать права
we need to protect
зарубежных компаний
OEP
на нашем рынке.
rights of foreign firms here in Russia and in the region.
Во-первых, я уверен, что участники нашей
Colleagues.
сессии однозначно уверены,
I believe
что у нас
that
не то, что не было рояля в кустах.
You can
Наш
all
диалог
see
был
that
абсолютно спонтанный,
it was not orchestrated, it was an impromptu dialogue. Thank you so much, Mr. Manturov, for your sincere, straightforward comments. And Mr. Lipa, thank you for the specific success story that you've shared with us.
невозможно в 45 минут вместить то
Definitely,
многообразие
45 minutes is not
вопросов и
enough
задач,
to address all the issues that we have to tackle, to make sure that Russian products would enjoy recognition abroad,
чтобы мы, находясь за
to make
рубежом,
sure that we are
гордились
proud
своей
of the
надписью.
products made in Russia whenever we see that label.
Ваше министерство,
And
Виктор Валерьевич, для
I'm
этого
positive that your government and your ministry is taking every action possible to
участникам, зрителям,
make sure that happens. So stay safe. Good luck in 2022.
здоровых и
I wish you health and happiness.